Ada Uzodinma was a beautiful young teenage girl, loved dearly by her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Uzodinma. She was their only child, and they showered her with everything she wanted. Ada was a bright student in secondary school, and though her parents were always busy with work, she spent most of her time alone at home, except for the company of their beloved dog, Jackie. Jackie was a large, friendly dog that had been with the family for so long, and they had formed a special bond. Ada loved reading novels and storybooks. One day, as she was flipping through her collection, she stumbled upon a romantic book. As she continued reading, something stirred inside her, a strange feeling she had never experienced before. From that day, Ada began to crave for romantic stories. Eventually found herself drawn to adult content on her phone when no one was around. These desires consumed her, and she often imagined what it would be like to experience it for herself. As time passed, Ada finished secondary school, but the craving only grew stronger. She could not think of anything but satisfying the new desire building inside her. One afternoon, while alone at home with Jackie, she began to play with the dog. What started as harmless play quickly escalated. That day, Ada did the unthinkable. She slept with Jackie. Although their first encounter was terrible, Ada could not stop thinking about it. Each day, she found herself wanting more. The bond between Ada and Jackie grew stronger, but in a way that no one could ever imagine. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Uzodinma, believed that their daughter's affection for the dog was normal, just a result of her growing up with Jackie. But they had no idea of the dark secret Ada was hiding. By the time Ada turned 18 and gained admission into the university, she was not as excited as her parents thought she would be. Leaving for school meant leaving Jackie behind, and though she hated boys, her attachment to Jackie was unlike anything else. A few months later, Ada left for the university, but while her classmates focused on their studies, Ada found it hard to concentrate. She constantly thought of Jackie in her loneliness. She would touch herself, trying to relieve the feelings she once had, but nothing gave her the satisfaction she craved. She struggled through her first semester, and during the holiday break, Ada was eager to return home, not to see her parents, but to be with Jackie again. When she got home, her parents welcomed her warmly, and of course, Jackie was excited to see her too. From the first night she returned, Ada resumed a disturbing relationship with Jackie. They slept together every night, and she found comfort and satisfaction in their encounters. But deep down, Ada knew this was wrong, and the weight of her secret was growing heavier each day. Soon it was time to return to school, but this time Ada started feeling sick. At first, she thought it was just a fever, but as the days passed, the sickness grew worse. Eventually, Ada had traveled back to school. Her parents were worried and took her to the hospital. The doctor ran several tests, and after a few days, the result came in. Ada, to her shock, was pregnant. Her parents were stunned. They immediately asked her who was responsible, but Ada could not say a word. She knew the only one she had ever been with was Jackie. She simply shook her head in silence, tears streaming down her face. "Ada, who is responsible for this pregnancy?" her mother demanded. "I do not know," Ada whispered, barely able to get the words out. "As big as you are, how can you say you do not know who got you pregnant?" Her father barked, his face full of anger and disappointment. Days turned into weeks, but Ada still could not tell them the truth. She locked herself in her room, crying day and night. She knew she had brought shame upon her family. But what hurted her the most was a question she kept asking herself. Was she going to give birth to a human baby or something else? Her parents, hoping she would eventually confess, refused to terminate the pregnancy. They held on to the hope that she would reveal the truth. But as the months passed, Ada's silence remained. One evening, after dinner, Ada suddenly went into labor. Her parents rushed her to the hospital, both anxious and confused. Hours passed and Ada screamed in pain. When the delivery was finally over, the doctor and the nurses stood in shock. Ada had not given birth to a human baby. She had given birth to a litter of puppies. The doctor rushed to tell her parents the shocking news. The moment Mrs. Uzodinma heard the words, she fainted on the spot. The hospital room was cold and filled with silence that seems to swallow every sound. Ada lay on the bed, exhausted and drenched in sweat, her heart pounding as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. The sight of puppies still lingered in her mind, a nightmare she could not escape from. Her whole body trembled with fear and shame. She had never imagined this would be her fate. Outside the delivery room, Mr. Uzodinma was holding his unconscious wife, Mrs. Uzodinma, as the doctors and nurses screamed to revive her. They had just been told that their daughter had given birth to something unimaginable, puppies. They had believed that they would become grandparents to a human baby, but this was something that their mind could not comprehend. After several minutes, Mrs. Uzodinma regained consciousness, but the look in her eyes was different. She seemed lost, her mind unable to process the horrifying news. She looked at her husband, her voice trembling. "What kind of curse has fallen our family, Uzodinma? What have we done to deserve this?" Mr. Uzodinma did not have any answers. His face was pale, his hands trembling as he held his wife. "I don't know," he muttered, his voice breaking. The doctor, still in disbelief, asked for a private meeting with Ada's parents inside the small consultation room. They began to explain that this was unlike anything they had ever seen. The medical director spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully. "We have never seen such a case before. What your daughter gave birth to are puppies. This situation defies everything we know medically. It's unnatural." Mr. Uzodinma snapped, his voice rising. "What are you trying to say? Are you saying our daughter is cursed?" The doctor hesitated, then added, "I cannot say for sure, but we must consider every possibility. This might be the result of something beyond our understanding." Mrs. Uzodinma burst into tears again, her hands covering her face. She could not believe that their once happy family had descended into such a tragedy. Her only daughter, her precious Ada, had given birth to dogs. What would people say? How would they explain this? Back in the room, Ada was left alone with her thoughts. The nurses had taken the puppies away, leaving her in dust. The shame was unbearable, and the weight of what she had done pressed down on her chest. like a heavy stone. She knew she had no one to blame but herself. But how could she ever tell her parents the truth? How could she admit that she had been sleeping with Jackie, their dog? Ada's heart raced as she thought of Jackie. Was he still at home, lingering his stays as if nothing had happened? The thought of him filled her with confusion. She did not know whether to be angry, scared, or ashamed. But deep down, she could not help but feel connected to him. As sick as it made her feel, the days following the delivery were tense. Ada's parents did not know what to do. They could not go back to their normal lives, not after what had happened. Rumors began to spread in the neighborhood. People noticed that the Uzodinma family had stopped attending church and their unusual active social life had come to a standstill. Soon people began to talk. Whispers filled the air. Some said Ada had been cursed by an evil spirit. Others said she had been involved in something dark and unholy. But no one knew the full truth. One evening, Mr. Uzodinma called Ada into the living room. Her mother sat on the couch, her face pale and swollen from crying. They had reached the point where they needed answers, no matter how painful. Ada, her father began, his voice heavy with sadness. We have been patient, hoping you will tell us the truth. We cannot hide this anymore. We deserve to know what really happened. Who is responsible for this? Who did this to you? Ada sat in silence, staring at her hands. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she was too scared to speak. How could she destroy their trust forever by admitting the truth? Ada, answer your father. Her mother shouted, unable to hold back her frustration. This is killing us. If you do not tell us, how can we ever move on? With trembling hands, Ada wiped her eyes and whispered, I do not know. Her father's voice grew louder. Frustration filling the room. Stop saying you do not know. We have asked you for months now, and you keep giving us the same answer. Ada, this is no normal pregnancy. And you know that. At that moment, Ada felt something snap inside her. The guilt and fear she had buried deep within her soul erupted. And before she could stop herself, the words spilled out. I slept with Jackie, she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. I slept with our dog. The room fell into a deafening silence. Mr. and Mrs. Uzodinma sat frozen, unable to process what their daughter had just said. The air felt thick, and time seemed to stand still. What did you just say? Her mother finally asked, her voice shaking, as if she did not believe what she had just heard. I am sorry, Ada sobered, her whole body shaking. It started long time ago. I did not mean for this to happen, but I could not stop. Jackie is the father. Her parents stared at her, their eyes wide with horror. It was as if the ground had been ripped from beneath them. How could their only daughter, the child they loved so dearly, do something so unimaginable? Mr. Uzodinma stood up angrily, his face contorted with anger and disbelief. You slept with a dog? Ada, what kind of disgrace have you brought upon this family? How could you? Ada sobbed harder, unable to look her father in the eyes. She knew she had crossed a line that could never be undone. Mrs. Uzodinma collapsed into the couch, his hands covering her face once again. God, what have we done to deserve this? She cried, her voice filled with pain and regrets. There was no going back now. The truth was out, and nothing would ever be the same again. The night after Ada's confession was one of the sleepless torments for the entire Uzodinma family. Ada lay in her room, curled up on her bed, her eyes swollen from endless tears. Her body was trembling from exhaustion, but her mind would not stop racing. The weight of her confession had been lifted, but now she was faced with destruction. She had shattered her parents' hearts, and the shame was overwhelming. In the living room, Mr. Uzodinma passed up and down, his face contorted in disbelief. His thoughts were scattered. His only daughter, the girl he had raised with love and care, had done something so unimaginable, so horrifying, that he could barely make sense of it. How did we not see this coming? He muttered, mostly to himself. How could she have done something so vile under our roof? And we did not even notice. Mrs. Uzodinma, who was sitting silently in the corner, was too stunned to respond. Her eyes were blank, staring at nothing, as if her mind had completely shut down. She had cried for hours, but now there was no tears left. The only emotion left was deep sorrow, and the pain seemed to clown at her heart with each passing minute. We must do something, Mr. Uzodinma finally said, his voice shaking with anger. This cannot be allowed to continue. We have to get rid of that dog, Jackie. Jackie is the root of all this evil. Mrs. Uzodinma flinched at the mention of the dog's name, Jackie. Jackie had been with the family for years. He had been a loving pet, always loyal, always kind. How could she reconcile the dog she had loved with the horror that had unfolded? Are you sure that is the solution? She asked weakly. With getting rid of Jackie, fits what had already happened, Mr. Uzodinma clenched his fists, the frustration evident on his face. It's a start, he replied coldly. We cannot let this abomination continue. That animal has no place in our home anymore. The following morning, Mr. Uzodinma took Jackie away without telling Ada where he was taking the dog. Ada had spent the entire night crying, barely able to close her eyes. She heard her father's car start up and knew immediately what was happening. Jackie was gone. Her heart sank deeper, but she could not bring herself to protest. What could she say? How could she defend herself after what she had done? As days passed, the house grew colder and more silent. No one knew what to do with the horrifying situation. Ada's parents still had not come to the terms with the fact that their daughter had given birth to puppies. They tried to keep everything quiet, but rumors were already spreading around the community. Neighbors whispered behind their backs, and curious glances followed them wherever they went. The Uzodinma family, once respected and admired, had become the subject of gossip and ridicule. At the market, Mrs. Uzodinma overheard two women whispering as they passed her. Have you heard about the Uzodinma girl? One of them said in a hushed voice. They say she gave birth to a dog. Can you imagine what kind of evil could lead to something like that? Mrs. Uzodinma hurried away, her heart sinking, as she realized the shame was no longer just within the walls of their home. It was spreading like wildfire. Meanwhile, Ada became a shell of herself. She no longer left her room, no longer speak to anyone. She stayed inside, consumed by guilt and shame, replaying the horrifying moments over and over in her mind. She had destroyed her family, and now she did not know how to live with the consequences. One evening, as Ada lay on her bed, she heard a soft knock on her door. She did not respond. A few seconds later, her mother quietly entered the room. sitting down beside her on the edge of the bed. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Mrs. Uzodinma broke the silence. Her voice soft but filled with sadness. "Ada," she began, "we need to talk about this. This thing that had happened, we cannot hide from it forever." Ada did not look up. She could not. The weight of her mother's disappointment was too much to bear. "I know you are ashamed, and I know you regret what you have done," her mother continued. "But we need to understand. We need to know how it gets this far. How could you, Ada? How could this happen to our family?" Ada finally lifted her head, her face pale and streaked with tears. She stared at her mother, her lips trembling as she tried to find the words. "I do not meant for it to happen," she whispered. "It started so innocently, but then it got out of control. I could not stop." Mrs. Uzodinma's heart broken all over again. Her daughter's words were filled with pain, but there was something deeper, something more disturbing. "But why, Ada? Why would you do this? We gave you everything you ever needed. Why did not you come to us if you were struggling?" "I do not know, Mama," Ada cried, her voice breaking. "I was confused. I was lonely. You and Daddy were always busy with work, and I had no one. I did not meant for this to get this bad." Her mother's eyes filled with tears again, but this time there was a flicker of understanding behind them. She had been so caught up in her work, in providing for her family, that she had not noticed her daughter slipping away. Maybe if they have paid more attention, maybe if they had been there for her, things would not have gone so far. "I am so sorry, Mama," Ada sobbed, her hands clutching her mother's. "I am so sorry for everything." Mrs. Uzodinma pulled her daughter into a tight embrace, tears streaming down both of their faces. For the first time in months, they share a moment of vulnerability, of understanding. The pain and shame were still there, but so was the love that had always held their family together. Deep down inside, they both knew that this was the only beginning. The road ahead was certain, and the shame would not easily fade. The truth of what had happened between Ada and Jackie would haunt them for a long time. The following weeks were a mixture of silent and strange conversations in the Uzodinma household. Though Ada had confided in her mother, the tension remained thick in the air. Mr. Uzodinma could barely look at his daughter, his heart still too heavy with anger and disappointment. He spent most of his days at work, avoiding the house altogether. Ada, on the other hand, felt as though she was trapped in a prison of her own making. Every time she passed a mirror, she could not bear to look at herself. The weight of her secret felt heavier with each passing day. Meanwhile, the whisper outside their home had only grew louder. The rumor mill was relentless. People speculated about Ada's unusual pregnancy, about the puppies, and even about the family decisions to hide the truth. The story was no longer just a scandal. It had become a twisted form of entertainment for the entire community. Ada could feel the eyes on her whenever she ventured out of the house, so she stopped going out altogether. Back at home, Ada sat on her bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. She could not shake the feeling that something terrible was happening. The weight of her actions bore down on her, suffocating her. The guilt was eating her alive. Her mind kept drifting back to Jack, to the way things had started so innocently and had turned into something she could no longer control. But now it was not just guilt, it was far. What if the puppies were not normal? What if they were something else? The thought haunted her, gnawing at the edge of her sanity. That night, when Mrs. Uzodinma returned home, she did not say a word to Ada or her husband. She could not. But she had to do something. They could not keep this secret forever. The next day, Mr. Uzodinma finally broke the silence that had lingered between him and Ada since the day she gave birth. "We need to do something about this," he said, his face hard with determination. "This cannot be our life anymore. We cannot continue. We cannot hide this forever. What do you suggest?" Mrs. Uzodinma asked cautiously, knowing that her husband's anger was barely contained. "I do not know yet," he replied, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "But we need to find a way to deal with this mess." As they spoke, Ada sat in the next room, overhearing every word. She felt her heart racing as her parents discussed her facts, but she could not bring herself to intervene. What could she say? She had already destroyed their lives, and now whatever decision they made, she would have to live with it. But deep down, Ada knew that this was not the end. The days passed slowly. After Ada's parents had their heated conversation, Ada was left alone in her room most of the time, isolated from the world and from the life she once knew. The air in the house was thick with tension, and the secrets they were all keeping weighed heavily on them. One evening, when Ada could no longer bear the suffocating silence, she decided to take a walk round the house. She moved carefully, as though her presence might shatter what little peace remained. As she walked past the kitchen, she overheard her parents whispering, "We need to go to a pastor," Mrs. Uzodinma said, her voice trembling. "This is not natural. This is beyond us, beyond the doctors. We need divine intervention." Mr. Uzodinma sighed heavily, leaning against the counter. "I don't know, Ngozi. I don't know if a pastor can fix this, but we will try. We will do whatever it takes." Ada froze. A pastor? What good would that do? The thought of revealing her secret to someone else, of more people knowing what she had done, filled her with dread. But deep down, she knew her mother was right. What had happened to her was not normal, and if there was any chance of fixing it, she had to try. The next morning, Mr. and Mrs. Uzodinma took Ada to a well-known pastor who lived in the next town. The man had a reputation for dealing with difficult and mysterious situations, and they hoped he would provide some answers. As they sat in the pastor's office, Ada could feel her heart pounding in her chest. The pastor, a calm and soft-spoken man in his 50s, listened quietly as they explained the situation. Ada remained silent, her eyes fixed on the floor, too ashamed to look at anyone. After a long pause, the pastor spoke. "What has happened here is no ordinary sin," he said, his voice steady but firm. "There are spiritual consequences for actions like this, and these consequences have already begun to manifest." Ada felt a chill run down her spine. Spiritual consequences? She had never considered that what she had done might affect her soul. "The bond between you and this animal," the pastor continued, "was more than physical. It was unnatural, and now the offspring of that union carry the weight of that sin. They are not meant to exist in this world." Tears welled up Ada's eyes. She had known deep down that something was terribly wrong. But hearing it spoken out loud make it real. Her chest tightened as the pastor continued. "There is only one way to free yourself from this burden," he said, looking directly at her. "There is only one way to free yourself from this burden," he said, looking directly at her. "You must repent fully, and you must cut all ties with the past. That means letting go of the puppies and the dog. They are a part of this sin, and as long as they remain, the consequences will continue to hurt you." Ada's heart sank. Let go of Jackie. He had been her only companion, the only one who had offered her comfort in her darkest moments. But now she realized that their relationship had been built on something twisted, something wrong. The pastor's word hung in the air, and Ada's parents looked at her, waiting for her to respond. Slowly, Ada nodded. She had no choice. She could not keep living this world, trapped in her own guilt and shame. As days passed, Ada felt a strange sense of relief. The burden, though still heavy, seemed to be lifting. The nightmare that had haunted her began to fade, and she slowly started to regain a sense of normalcy. But the guilt never fully left her. She knew that what she had done would stay with her for the rest of her life. Months later, after intense counseling and spiritual guidance, Ada returned to school, determined to start fresh. Her life would never be the same, and she would always carry the scale of the past. But she was ready to move forward, to seek forgiveness, and to rebuild her life. Moral lesson: desires and curiosity, when left unchecked, it can lead to dangerous and irreversible consequences. Ada's journey showed the importance of self-control, personal responsibility, and the devastating efforts of giving in to harmful temptations. Her actions not only brought shame and regret, but also caused suffering to those around her. This story serves as a reminder that our choices have consequences, and we must think carefully about the paths we choose to follow, especially in moments of weakness and curiosity. Always be mindful of your actions, for some mistakes can hurt you forever. Thanks guys for watching this video. Do not forget to subscribe to this channel to support us, like, share and drop your comment below. And do not forget to tell us the country or the cities you are watching from. Thank you guys. We love you all.